So welcome to meeting number 76 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. I recognize Mr. Julian shortly. Once I get through this preamble, I'll recognize you.
Could I be on the list after him, please, Chair?
And you next?
I'll be on the list after. Thank you.
Pursuant to the order of reference of Friday, November 25th, 2022, the committee continues consideration of Bill C-20, an act establishing the Public Complaints and Review Commission and amending certain acts and statutory instruments. Today, the committee resumes clause-by-clause consideration. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. So when we adjourned last, we did not continue the debate. So strictly speaking, the matters that were under debate at that time are terminated. Mr. Julian, please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, mais j'ai quelques...
Thank you very much. I've got something to offer. It's a motion that I'm going to suggest, and then, of course, I'm going to talk about that afterwards. The motion's already been distributed to all the members of the committee, and it reads as follows, that the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security hold a 3-hour meeting immediately after the committee study of Bill C-20 on the rights of victims of crime and the security reclassification and transfer of offenders within federal corrections, that the committee invite to appear the current Minister of Public Safety to the Commissioner of Correctional Service Canada. Sorry, in the French version, it will say that the committee invites the Commissioner of Correctional Service Canada, Anne Kelly, Deputy Minister of Public Safety, Sean Tupper, and the Correctional Investigator and the Federal Ombudsman for Victims of Crime, Tim Banson, and 3 representatives of the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers to appear and 4 representatives of the Union of Safety and Justice Employees to appear. Furthermore, that the committee invite immediately the Minister of Public Safety and Minister departmental officials to come to the committee for 2 hours to discuss the Public Safety Minister's mandate. Finally, that the committee hold a 1-hour in-camera meeting to be briefed on trauma-informed questioning at committee for future testimony from victims.
A bit of a typo. The Minister of Public Safety should appear just in that second section. The reason why I'm proposing this is having listened very attentively to both the Liberal colleagues, the Conservative colleagues, and also Madame Michaud from the Bloc Québécois. We seem to have a consensus around having meetings. There was an insistence, I understand, from the Conservatives of talking about 6 hours. You'll see, of course, that this motion refers to 6 hours of meetings. That we have, of course, the Minister of Public Safety before us, but that invitation is both on this subject but also on all other subjects of the mandate. And also from Madame Rempel Gardner's comments about trauma-informed questioning, adding that in as well. So hopefully, with a bit of tweaking, we can get this motion adopted. Go on to C-20. We've got our witnesses here today, and they will be giving us, I think, a lot of good wisdom as we move forward on C-20. And then following C-20, we would have that 3-hour meeting with the witnesses. We'll have, of course, the minister being invited on the mandate, also including this issue, and having an in-camera meeting on trauma-informed questioning at committee. So I'm hoping that this is a consensus that we can treat relatively quickly and move on to C-20 tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. And I note that we have been seized with this issue for the last 3 meetings, so I will regard this as continuation of that business, and not, and so there's no requirement for a 24-hour notice.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order.
On the point of order, Mr. Tennis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The agenda for this, Mr. Julian, I'm open to a discussion about some aspects of this, but Mr. Julian did not provide the required 48-hour notice. And the matter at hand, according to the agenda, is C20, which means that a motion has to either be on C20 or on a matter being discussed. And the fact that we discussed this issue at a previous meeting does not make it a matter at hand. The fact that it was discussed 2 days ago does not make it the matter at hand at the beginning of this meeting. Mr. Julian got the floor and moved this motion, which he would be entitled to do if it had been on notice for 48 hours. But it is, respectfully, it's not plausible to say that something having been discussed at a previous meeting 48 hours ago makes it the matter at hand. So I would respectfully suggest that Mr. Julian can present some of these proposals in the context of an amendment to a motion under discussion, but it is very clearly not the matter at hand.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. This matter is not something we just happened to discuss in a previous meeting. This has been the focus of the last 3 meetings. And as chair, I have ruled it in order. If you wish to challenge the chair, please do so.
Mr. Chair, before I make a decision about challenging the chair, would you allow the clerk to provide clarification on what is meant by matter at hand in the rules?
Mr. Clerk, would you wish to?
Mr. Chair, if you would allow, I would welcome the clerk providing clarification to the committee, but
I've asked the clerk to make a response if he wishes.
So what I can do is read, in fact, the routine motion, which is regarding the notice of motions that says that 48 hours notice interpreted as 2 nights be required for any substantive motion to be moved in committee, unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under consideration. So that's the routine motion.
So my judgment is this, de facto, is a matter under consideration.
Yeah, Chair. Just a point of order. What the clerk has read says matter currently under consideration, and you're interpreting currently under consideration as meaning a matter that has been discussed frequently at previous meetings. That is quite obviously not the same as a matter currently under consideration. So that is the rule. If members of the committee choose to, if the chair, obviously elected as a member of the governing party, and if a majority of the committee choose to show flagrant disregard for the rules, then I would suggest that puts this committee on a further troubling path, and is not the way to move forward constructively, regardless of the creativity being shown. I think the rules are pretty clear that matter at hand means matter at hand, not something that had been discussed at previous meetings.
I think we've gone beyond point of order. The chair has ruled on this matter.
Yeah, I will of course challenge the chair, and
very well. The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? If you vote yes, you vote to sustain the decision of the chair that this motion is in order. If you vote no, you vote that the decision of the chair is not in order. And I guess we'll call for a recorded vote.
Ms. O'Connell?
Yes.
Mr. Biddle?
yes.
Mr. Gaillard?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Schiffke? Oui. Mr. Shipley?
No.
Mr. Jenners?
No.
Mr. Mutz?
No.
Ms. Lewis?
No.
Madame Michaud?
En faveur.
Mr. Julian?
Oui, en faveur.
Therefore, the decision of the chair is sustained. This motion is in order and it is moved. Mr. Julian, did you wish to carry on with presenting your debate?
Yes, thank you.
Point of order. For point of
order,
clarification, so you're waiving the 2 days' notice for the presentation of this notice of motion?
He's making up the rules.
As said, yes, I believe that this is a matter that we were engaged with, seized with, all of the last 3 meetings, essentially. So it is, in my mind, it is a continuation. But
He's
the matter
following
has been
PMO
decided,
instructions.
And we need to carry on. Mr. Julian.
Point of order. I'm just seeking clarification, Chair. If you were seized with the motion, because I wasn't here before, why did we have to move a new notice of motion? If the matter was already before this committee, why is there a notice of motion present today? Why is it not an amendment?
We're getting into debate.
No. I'm just asking
Okay,
for the purposes of procedure. That's what.
I will answer you.
Yes.
So we have been seized with this matter for 3 solid meetings. And at the end of the last meeting, we adjourned, but we did not continue the debate on those motions. So the floor is basically open to Mr. Julian's motion, and in my estimation, it is a continuation of business that we were very thoroughly embroiled in. We'll go now to Ms.
Point of order. That wasn't my question, Chair. My question was specifically, why do we have a new notice of motion? If we were seized with a motion that was...
This has been asked and answered.
Right.
Mr.
No,
Julian
I'm asking for a procedural purpose, Chair.
Mr. Julian brought forward a
why are
motion.
we not dealing with an amendment, Chair?
Because the motions that were previously on the floor were not continued at the adjournment, so they're dead. If they were moved again, they could be considered again. But Mr. Julian's motion is ruled in order.
Point of order, Chair. But you said that they were dead. If they were dead, then that means that they have to be resurrected. And the rules clearly state that to resurrect or to bring a notice of motion, you need notice. You need 2 days' notice, and I think the proper procedure, Chair, would be to do an amendment.
This matter has been addressed. The chair has made a ruling. The committee has sustained the chair's ruling. It's not a matter under discussion any further. Mr. Julian, if you can.
Thank
Maybe
you
just
very much,
a point
Mr.
of
Chair.
order,
I
Chair.
think the other
point of order.
Mr. Jenness on a point of order.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I can just be helpful. My colleague was looking for clarification about how this made sense. It doesn't make sense. The Chair has clearly been directed by PMO to implement a ruling that has nothing to do with the rules, no precedent, no basis in this place, and
you do not have the floor.
And I think it's clear that the way he's behaving is out of step with the rules.
You are out of order.
Yeah.
This was a decision by the chair alone, for the good of this committee. Mr. Julian, if you wish.
Who advised you,
Mr. Chair? And Mr. Chair,
to make a statement that you're a creature of statute,
point
and
of
this
order.
brings the
Statement is not
entire
a point of order.
this brings the entire procedure
You're not
into
in order.
disrepute.
You are out of order.
thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Lewis wasn't here 48 hours ago, but Mr. Jenness was, and he'll recall that I gave the notice of motion 48 hours ago. So even if that was his point of order, he understands that I spoke to this issue, spoke to this amendment, spoke to this motion 48 hours ago. So Conservatives have no excuse. They have no pretext. They got their 48 hours notice, even if they disagree with the chair's ruling. So can we please have consideration of the motion rather than these incredibly wasteful and for taxpayers' purposes, tens of thousands of dollars have been invested now into this Conservative filibuster when we have people from public safety, people from the RCMP, people who have very busy jobs, who are here to answer questions on C20. I would hope that the Conservatives would not destroy another committee meeting at the cost of tens of thousands of dollars and would allow this discussion and hopefully a consensus on this motion. 48 hours ago, I gave notice of this. It was also distributed as a courtesy to all members of the committee. So I find this, quite frankly, I'm flabbergasted by Conservatives trying to pretend that the notice wasn't given 48 hours ago and trying to overturn a decision that was made by this committee a few minutes ago. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I will speak to this motion. Again, I will read into the record the motion just a second time, just to make sure that everyone is aware and that the typo is corrected. The Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security hold a 3-hour meeting immediately after the committee's study of Bill C-20 on the rights of victims in crime and the security reclassification and transfer of offenders within federal corrections. That the committee invite, and we strike that first line, that's a duplicate, So renumber 1, the Commissioner of Correctional Services Canada, Ann Kelly, Deputy Minister of Public Safety, Sean Tupper, and the Correctional Investigator and the Federal Ombudsman for Victims of Crime, Tim Danson, to appear. 2, representative of the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers to appear. 3, representative or representatives of the Union of Safety and Justice Employees to appear. Furthermore, that the committee invite immediately the Minister of Public Safety and Ministry departmental officials to come to committee for 2 hours to discuss the Public Safety Minister's mandate. And finally, that the committee hold a 1-hour in-camera meeting to be briefed on trauma-informed questioning. Please strike the word "of" at committee for future testimony from victims. This
I'm sorry, Chair,
is
just
a
a point of order.
consensus of all of the comments
Sorry,
that
Chair,
were
just a
made.
point of order.
I have a point of order. Just for clarification, and I'm very, very sorry. I'm not trying to be obstreperous, but does
Please.
yes, does the Conservatives have a current motion on this issue on the floor? Because
No, they
that's
do not.
The Liberals do.
No, they do not.
So does that get withdrawn?
can the clerk clarify that matter? Because then we
Clerk
may
doesn't
have
need to clarify it. As I have said several times already in this meeting, we did not continue that debate. We did not continue those motions when we adjourned our last meeting. Therefore, those motions are no longer on the floor. Mr. Julian, if you would please.
Point of order.
Mr. Jennings on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The rule is that when a verbal notice of motion is provided, it appears in the minutes
Mr.
of the
Jennings,
meeting. Can I finish the
No, you may
sentence,
not.
Chair? This is not
We're
Mr.
debating-
Julian.
Excuse me. We're debating a matter that's already been decided by
Chair,
the committee
Chair,
and conferred by the committee.
Chair,
So let us carry on.
that's not what I'm raising. You haven't even heard my point of order, Chair, and you're already trying to proactively ruling on it. Chair, my point of order is with respect to the accuracy of the minutes of the last meeting, because Mr. Julian is quite convinced, and I'm sure he is sincerely convinced that he gave a verbal notice of motion at the last meeting. However, I reviewed the minutes, and the minutes do not contain that notice of motion. So either Mr. Julian is not correct, or the minutes are not correct. But for the benefit of members, the minutes should be correct so that we know what's.
We will encourage the clerk to address that matter, but the matter is irrelevant at this point because the decision has been made, confirmed by
Mr.
the
Chair,
committee.
it's not irrelevant.
We are going forward with this.
I understand you ruled that the motion is on the floor, but my issue is, Mr. Biddle. Yeah, I mean it is annoying when you talk over me.
Annoying.
That's
Hey, guys,
true.
settle
It
down,
is
please.
correct.
Please come to your point.
It is. Yeah. No. So my point is, Chair. If this motion was put on notice, which I agree to Mr. Julian's point is an important fact, and if it was put on notice, then he is in a very strong position in terms of being able to move the motion. However, it is not in the minutes, and we should have accurate minutes as members so that we know what motions to expect. Because certainly my expectation coming in here was that this motion had not been on notice because it was not in the minutes, and so you could ask us to review the
So,
written
Mr.
record of what
Jennings?
every member said, but
Mr.
it is not in the
Jennings?
minutes. So I would like you to come back to the
Mr.
committee about
Jennings?
the accuracy of the minutes there, Chair. Thank you.
You are debating a matter that's already been decided.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about the minutes, the accuracy of the minutes.
As said,
That is not a matter that has been decided.
excuse me, I have the floor. As said, I've asked the clerk to take a look at the minutes and address any deficiencies. Mr. Julian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I don't want to take any more time on this. I think we've had, as you pointed out, 3 meetings, a cost of tens of thousands of dollars to Canadians, where Conservatives, and I mentioned this before, would agree to something offline that was then changed online. We had this discussion. It incorporates what the Conservatives were asking for. It incorporates what the government was proposing. It incorporates Madame Michaud's comments. Unless there is some tweaking that needs to be done, I would hope that we could just vote on this and move forward. And if any member of this committee feels that we still may want to go further after having these meetings on this issue, I would agree that in the same way, in the same spirit that we brought to the Canadian Heritage Committee, with all parties coming together to look at the issue of safe sports, we found with an initial meeting that we had on Hockey Canada, it led to, as you'll recall, Mr. Chair, for those who followed the Hockey Canada and Soccer Canada hearings, a study that lasted about 6 months. I think all members of this committee will be interested, first, in hearing from the witnesses. Secondly, we will have the Minister of Public Safety, and it is important for him to answer questions on this and other aspects of his mandate. A third aspect is having this committee be trauma informed, which was extremely helpful for the Canadian Heritage hearings. And then after that, as a committee, we can decide whether to move forward, whether to continue, whether to invite additional witnesses. But for goodness sakes, let us stop the waste of the incredible resources we have before us, witnesses that come from a wide variety of backgrounds in terms of public safety who are here to answer questions on C20, and let us keep the commitment that we have to the House and to Canadians to get the Bill C20 amendments through, and hopefully a bill that is improved and out of committee and back to the House. That's a responsibility. And then, as the Conservatives have indicated, they want to do this study, and this study is now before us. I am hoping, given that it is now 5:45 on day 4 of this filibuster, that Conservatives will just accept the yes, will vote for it, and let us move on to the important amendments and improvements that we have to make to C20.
So were you moving unanimous consent, or did you wish to carry on with the debate?
Well, hopefully we can just have a vote. I can.
We can't have a vote because we have a speakers list. So if you had been moving or were moving unanimous consent.
You mentioned a little tweaking. I'm up next. Can we try to do a little tweaking?
Okay. I mean, I don't believe we'll have unanimous consent. I'm just looking at reading the room or part of the room.
Fair enough. We go to Mr. Shipley then.
But,
Sorry.
Well, I will try that if we can have unanimous consent to adopt the motion as written.
Is it the will of the committee to adopt this motion by unanimous consent? Okay, we have no unanimous consent. Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and kind of a rocky start to this one again. I think we're getting very close here. I think that really helps. I was actually just going to do my amendments and carry on, but when you're just getting the cheap seats, throwing out the cheap comments, it got on your nerves. No, but you didn't say a word to them, so I'm trying to focus. They're the ones I had the floor.
Let's try to avoid crosstalk, please. No crosstalk,
When you're
please.
speaking, I don't say a word.
No crosstalk, please.
He's the one doing it.
I just
I have the
advised
floor.
everyone to have no crosstalk. Please let us carry on.
Just.
You're just
Anyways,
carrying water for the PMO.
I'm just trying to. I was actually just going to put forward. I
Excuse
like
me,
the
Mr.
word.
Shipley.
I like.
Yes, Mr. Jennings,
Sorry.
your remarks are offensive, and you should apologize for them. Mr. Shipley, carry on.
I'm just trying to. I like the word my friend from the NDP used with a tweak. So I'm going to bring forward very small. I think small, but the way this has been going lately and the way emotions are revving so high and comments are flowing already and everybody's got their hearts beating and stresses up, probably will turn into another horror show, but here we go. I'd like to, and my amendments are for a reason. The reason, well, every time I speak, he's throwing.
I'm sorry,
I
didn't
can hear him
anything.
loud and clear. I'm sure everybody in the room
I have
can.
an earpiece in, maybe that's
So-
made a difference. But anyway, if we could
It's not
keep,
bothering me. It's just
if-
annoying because it's
if
just
we could
like,
avoid crosstalk,
wow, when you're
and if you
here.
could carry on, please.
So the reason I'd like to do a little tweak to it is I had a long and lengthy. I've had many texts, but I've had a long and lengthy discussion with Mr. Danson, who is a very busy man. He informed me of that. He does want to attend, probably be virtually. So my concern is that if we hold 1 3-hour meeting, it's going to be a little bit difficult. We're really putting him under the gun for a busy guy, and he has spoke to the families. They are. It's just too much for them to attend, but they do want to have their words spoken to this committee through him. So I really think, in fairness, if we just basically it's going to be the exact same amount of time, but if we do it over a couple different meetings instead of the 1 3-hour meeting, I think that will make it easier for people to attend. And even taking something like today, if let's just say we had this meeting, this 3-hour meeting scheduled for today, and we ended up having all these votes like we had, it's going to be very hard to get that 3-hour meeting in. So my simple, I'll use the word that my colleague down here, tweak, used, is that I would like to put forward the amendment that I would like to replace where it says 3-hour meeting with 3 meetings.
Oh, come on, seriously, like serious.
But it's
not serious of doing the study.
Let's keep the crosstalk down, please.
it turns out to be the same thing. It's just that we're not doing it all in one day. We're with 3 meetings and adding number 5 to still invite the former Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendocino. And I said, you're looking for, it's still 6 hours. We're not trying to do anything any longer. I'm just trying to do it over 3 meetings so we can get it done, I think, a little easier. As I mentioned, for time constraints.
Okay, so let's clarify what amendments you're proposing.
I want to replace the 3-hour meeting with 3 separate meetings, so that's still just 6 hours.
Okay.
And adding a number 5 to Mr. Julian's motion that we still invite the former Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendocino. So it's not, I believe it is a tweak. I think if everybody just steps back for a minute, takes a deep breath, it's still 6 hours. It's the same. We're just doing it so people have some options. It's very hard to get people here to attend who are busy to invite witnesses. So I'm giving them, I'm trying to make it easier for us, for you, Chair, to organize this, to get people here. It's not any longer. It's the same amount of time. It's just over 3 different.
Okay, so we have an amendment on the floor. And
Well, I'm not quite finished yet. I
Okay.
was just stopping so I could still hear Mr. Biddle. It's always interesting.
they're having a little bit of
No, he
chat
wasn't. It was
amongst
coming this
themselves,
way
so-
again.
If they want to, do they want to suspend? Or?
So that's all I'm looking for. I'm really not. I really do want to get this done. I think it's the same concept. It's not any more hours. We're trying to just make it a little easier. All of our meetings are usually 2 hours long. I want to have 3 2-hour meetings instead of, as we're saying here, the 1-3, 1-2, and the 1-1. That's the only difference I'm putting on here, and still inviting the minister. So that's the only change on this. I honestly thought this was just a tweak, but I can just tell now everybody, it's just gone on so long.
Because you're still speaking.
Every time you talk,
No, stop. That's right.
no,
Speak through the chair if you could.
every time he talks, I'm just going to go on longer because it's just
You
annoying.
want to delay the victims' families represented from appearing. You're just going to.
You don't want
filibuster
them to
even more.
come.
I
Let's,
thought you cared about witnesses.
You don't
What
want
about
them to come.
I do want them to come. I actually
Is
spoke
this
to them.
allowed? I
Unlike
have
you
the
guys.
Mr.
floor.
Biddle, Mr. Biddle.
Unlike you guys who lied about
You guys lied.
Mr. Biddle.
What was that speech we just had from the new? What was the big speech we just had in the House about
Just hold
accusing
up,
someone of
everybody.
lying?
Point of
Biddle,
order.
If you could please come to order.
Point of order. Chair, I want to draw your attention to Rule 10, Rule 16, and Rule 18. Those all deal with decorum. It also deals with how we communicate with each other. Mr. Biddle referred to my colleagues as liars. That is contrary to the rules, and I'm going to ask that he be admonished for that.
Why, I didn't hear any such thing, but if he feels the need to apologize, I'm sure he will do so. Let us try and, get through this. Mr. Shipley, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I agree. I heard those exact words too, but anyways, I know there's other people who do want to speak to this. I'm really hoping we can get through this today. I don't think it is a huge change, but I'll leave it at that, and let's see where it goes.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. So
Thank you.
the discussion, the debate now is on Mr. Shipley's amendment to Mr. Julian's motion. And we have Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Chair. I heard the same comment just as a matter of reference to what was just said about referring to us as liars. However, I am troubled by the circus that we have. No. Every circus has a monkey, and I guess there's some of them across the way. Right over there.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Let Peter go.
Not you.
I would just like to say that I resent any of us being referred to as a monkey. If I was any animal, I would be an elephant at the very least.
Well,
So-
that's
Yeah.
You know,
that's probably for you.
Punish everyone to kind of keep our remarks civil and polite. And Mr. Motz, please carry on.
Thank you.
Mr. Julian, please, on the point of order.
Mr. Chair, I'm very embarrassed for our witnesses who've come now 4 times. If there is going to be another filibuster today, I think we certainly owe it, given their important work in public safety and protecting Canadians, that we let them go.
Can I speak on the same point of order, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Biddle, on the same point of order.
No, I have optimism. I agree with Mr. Julian. Typically, we should let the witnesses go, but I take Mr. Shipley at his word that he cares about the witnesses and timing of witnesses. And for 3 meetings in a row, he's had about 10 to 20 of them here. And since he has this newfound love of witnesses' timing, I think we should keep the witnesses here because I really have that optimism that Mr. Shipley and the Conservatives intend to keep this short and that we will get to it and we'll get to C20. So I think we should, if they're going to filibuster, but I take them at their word that this is going to be fast.
Can I speak to the same point of order, Chair?
Mr. Jennison, same point of order.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the witnesses' time, the curious thing about today's meeting is that the Chair invited a group of witnesses and yet also ruled that the Bernardo case was the matter at hand. So in the interests of preserving witness time, I would just suggest that if the Chair's view is that the matter at hand is the matter of the Bernardo transfer, then he shouldn't also invite witnesses. It's
thank
curious
you, Mr.
to invite
Dennis.
witnesses on a different topic than
Thank
what he
you,
has
Mr.
ruled to be the
Dennis.
matter at hand.
Mr. Dennis, you keep going back over a decision that has been made. We're not going back to that decision. It has been made. It has been supported by the committee. The question is whether or not to release the witnesses, whom I'm eternally grateful for being here yet once again. But I don't see any unanimous consent to do so. So,
Chair, just on that point of order, if I may, I am not going back to the previous matter, although I maintain the view that your decision was deeply flawed.
You may have whatever opinion you like on that.
The issue
The matter
here
is
is the
over.
question of the witnesses. If you believed that, as you've concluded, that something else was the matter at hand, then you shouldn't have invited witnesses on a different matter.
So, Mr. Dennis?
It doesn't make any
Dennis.
sense. Out of respect for the witnesses' time, you
Mr.
shouldn't have
Dennis.
invited them if there was a different matter at hand.
Mr. Dennis, you're out of order. The matter has been decided. We're not going to debate it at length. Mr. Julian came up with a suggestion. There is no unanimous consent, so the witness at this time cannot be released, and we will carry on with the debate. So, Mr. Motz, you were underway.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, let me begin again by apologizing to Mr. Biddle on the comment I made. It certainly doesn't foster a conversation that we're hoping to resolve. So he can accept it or he cannot. That's up to him. I will continue on with this motion and the conversation on this motion. We all agree around this table, at least I hope we did. There certainly wasn't any support initially when we began this process in the mid-September about having any committee time spent on this security transfer, security reclassifications, all those things related to the subject matter. I think we've come around to the fact that, yes, we need to have a meeting. We need to have meetings on this. And the issue boils down to not so much who all we're going to invite, because the majority of the people that we want to invite to do this study, I think there's some agreement on. We might want to add a name, take one off, whatever it is, and we're close on time. And I don't know why, as I said the other day, I don't know why the government would be so concerned about giving a study that has far-reaching implications than just the Bernardo transfer. There are dozens of transfers that occur with similar individuals, some with more than one murder conviction. There's multiple murder convictions, and they are moved from maximum to minimum, or to maximum to medium security prisons. It impacts a significant number of victims and victims' families in this country. And I think it would be important for us to have at least not just lip service to a study, but at least an attempt to try and hear from those who have something to tell us that might actually allow the government to change legislation to prevent these things from happening at the rate that they're happening, and actually deal with victims' rights. And that's exactly what this should be about. And now I support the effort of Mr. Julian to bring something forward that is close to workable. I still can't agree to a 3-hour meeting. It's not sufficient, in my opinion, to deal with the people that will be called to present at that committee. And I would ask colleagues to consider adding hours to a meeting, to meetings, and then we move on. I mean, we've spent an inordinate amount of time dealing with this issue, and for the Canadian public who are embarrassed for us all at this table, all sides, is why would the government be so dug in on an issue for an hour or two of time? That's the questions I get asked by people who've watched us online. Excuse me?
Rostock, please. Mr. Motz, carry on.
Thank you. Those are the questions I get, Mr. Chair, about why would the government not want this discussed? Why would the government not want their bill to be reviewed so that there is a mechanism that has communication to victims' families appropriately, that has the ability to limit those transfers? And it surprises me, but at least I hope that we can come to some sort of a compromise today in respect to the work that we have at hand. And I would hope that colleagues from all sides would come to a reasonable, decision on how we move forward with this. But I can't. I'm sorry, Mr. Julian. I can't commit to one 3-hour meeting or 3 hours total. It just doesn't work for the level of importance that this holds with our justice system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Madame Michaud. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we've had more than 6.5 hours of debate on several motions, all dealing with the same subject. We've heard the opinion of all the parties here. The Liberals acted in good faith with a motion they presented the last committee, and Mr. Julian has come forward with a motion in good faith to try and reach a reasonable compromise so that we don't hold up the study of C20 any further. I don't know what other colleagues feel, but I'm finding it hard to actually look the witnesses in the eye, because I know that we brought them here again and it's extremely expensive for taxpayers. I don't know if you've got the exact figures, or if the clerk could give us those exact figures so that our constituents are aware of what's happening here. And what we're doing, we're holding up a study of a bill which is extremely important. There's people who have been writing to each MP here. They've got emails from people who really want us to study C20. I've also met with representatives myself who are concerned about the study of C26 as well. We need to study that bill after C20, and that's also being held up now. So I think it's very disrespectful, and it's a real pity for people who are here who've got better things to do, no doubt. But we could actually draw on their expertise if we get down to studying C20. Having said that, I believe that Mr. Julian has come up with an acceptable compromise. I've just got a few technical questions on this. In the French version, it says that the committee will immediately hold a 3-hour meeting after the committee study of Bill C-20. Is it really immediately, or is it after C-20? Because it says immediately after in English, but in French it sounds like perhaps it's immediately rather than immediately after the committee study. So perhaps we can clarify that in the French version also. And I also have a question perhaps on this 1 hour in camera to be briefed on trauma-informed questioning. I'm wondering why we would do that exactly, because the people who are going to come before the committee are not actually necessarily victims themselves. I wonder whether it's relevant to have that extra 1 hour. And coming on to the amendment from Mr. Shipley, that brings us back to the start again. If we want to have 3 meetings on this, well, I think we've got this acceptable compromise of 3 hours plus 2 hours with the minister, which means 5 hours total on this. And then once again, to add in the ex-Minister of Public Safety, Mr. Mendicino. He's lost his department. I think perhaps we could leave him alone now. I don't think it's for him to answer on that. In this motion, we're going to hear from the current Public Safety Minister who can answer questions. So I'm ready to vote on this amendment and the motion so that we can move ahead with the study of Bill C-20, and perhaps Mr. Julian can answer my specific questions that I raised.
The clerk has taken notice of the deficiencies and will address them. I would point out that if we were to pass this motion, when we finish when we finish clause by clause in C-20, we still have to ramp up for C-26, and we don't know when it is. So this might be an opportunity to fill in between the two studies in an effective, useful way. So that's how I think we would approach it if we pass this motion. Mr. Julian, did you wish to respond to those questions?
Bien sûr, Monsieur le Président, mais dans la première...
Yes, of course, Mr. Chair. I think on the first case, you've explained well that it would be following after the study of Bill C-20. And then the question of trauma-informed questioning. It's an offer to the Conservatives because they wanted the victims to be questioned on these matters. We did find it very useful to take this approach at the Heritage Committee to be well informed before the victims appear. We're not closing the door to that, but I think we're not ready for the moment as a committee to have victims come and give their testimony before us. I think it's very important, and Ms. Rampel-Gartner, I believe, agreed on this as well, that the committee needs to be informed as to how we should question victims and how we can do that in a trauma-informed way, because these victims may well have undergone trauma. That is why this is something that could prepare us well for follow-up on this. If later as a committee we decide to invite victims on this file or on other matters, that we will be better prepared and trained on this. And as I said, with Heritage Committee, it really did make a difference. And I felt that the way in which we dealt with the victims was at a far higher, well-informed level, thanks to having had this briefing session beforehand.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Madame Michaud, êtes-vous fini? Ah, oui.
Can I just have a point of clarification on Mr. Julian's comment?
Quick point of clarification. We'll take as a brief point of order.
On this motion, is the 1 hour, and I think having trauma-informed training is very important on not only this matter, but other ones that we possibly could deal with, as you mentioned. Are you suggesting then that this is additional time? This isn't part of our study time. This is an additional time ahead of time or whenever to have this training in camera. That's not part of any sort of time that we set aside for the study. Is that correct?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it opens the door if this committee decides later, after hearing the testimony from the first two meetings, the first meeting being that 3-hour meeting that was proposed, with the witnesses that I think we all agreed on. The second meeting would be the Minister of Public Safety on this issue and any other issue that deals with the minister's mandate. And following on that, if we have the trauma-informed briefing, it allows the committee potentially, if we decide to invite witnesses who are victims either on this issue or any other issue, we will be better prepared. And if you ask me right now, would I be prepared to invite victims? As I mentioned 2 days ago at our committee, I would not be prepared to invite victims at this point to the committee, in the same way that I don't think as a committee we were ready for Canadian Heritage to invite the victims of the sexual assaults that tragically we saw in far too many Canadian sports organizations. So I believe the committee needs to do the work first before we can contemplate what next steps may be.
Thank you very much.
We'll go now to Mr. Dennis. And remind everyone we're debating at this time the amendments by Mr. Shipley, which is about whether we do 3 meetings or 1 3-hour meeting plus the others.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee on this amendment. I did want to make a comment on the issue of decorum because it has been raised by a number of members. And look, there has been some back and forth, some talking over, some interrupting that has happened at the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Biddle, for helping to reinforce my point. It is helpful. It's illustrative of the phenomenon we're dealing with, and when there are questions of
Okay, let's please avoid some crosstalk.
Chair, I think the way you have an orderly and well-structured committee is you recognize the clear rules that come from our traditions in Parliament.
Mr. Biddle on a point of order.
This is not related to the debate. I think Mr. Genois is again trying to come back on your ruling and doing indirectly what he can't do directly and needs to move on, or perhaps you should exercise your direction as chair if he's not going to be relevant to the topic at hand to move on the speaker's list.
If I can address the point of order,
Thank you, Mr.
Chair.
I do agree with Mr.
May
Biddle.
I address the point of order, Chair?
Off topic. I would ask you to get back on topic. If you wish to address on a point of order, carry on this point of order.
Okay, Chair, have you invited me to comment on the point of order or to return to my comments?
I'm inviting you to comment on the point of order.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The rules of the committee very clearly provide members to comment on matters that are presently being debated, and I think every one of the speeches before me have commented at some length on the context of the situation the committee finds itself in. I intend to be more brief in commenting on that context than others have been, but it would be unfortunate to find that rules were being selectively enforced in a different way for some members as opposed to others. So if that concludes my comment on the point of order, I'll now proceed to make further comments on the substantive matter at hand, Chair. There ought to be clear and consistent enforcement of the rules of the committee, and those rules come from the rule book, come from our long-standing traditions, and all members should be committed to the clear adherence to those rules.
Mr. Dennis?
If they wish the committees to function well.
Mr. Dennis, please come to order. I called your name several times. You must have heard it. I would ask you to confine your remarks to the matter at hand, not to a question of the rules and how they're being enforced. If you wish to bring up that as a separate matter at some other time. We are engaged right now on a debate on this motion put forward by Mr. Julian and as amended by the amendment proposed by Mr. Shipley. Please try and confine your remarks to that, those matters.
Thank you, Chair. I will move on at this point because I think you've actually made my argument for me better than I could have myself. the issue of the witnesses present as well, I did just want to touch on that as well, though, and this is the reality.
Mr. Janice, Mr. Janice, we've dealt with that. Let's move on. The witnesses have been invited. We have asked the committee if it's okay to release them. We're not able to do so at this time.
Chair, every other member who has spoken as part of this debate has addressed this matter, and I haven't even finished a sentence on the matter, and you're interrupting me and preventing me from doing so. Again, the selective application of the rules by a member of the Liberal caucus is transparent, and it's not in your interest to show such flagrant disregard for consistency or the rules of the committee. It just undermines your credibility before this committee and the public mind. And I know it might seem convenient in the moment to not enforce the rules, but my suggestion to you is that the institution depends on your willingness to do so.
Mr. Dennis, please stop. You can have personal grievances with how I'm managing the meeting, but please let's get back on topic here. We're debating Mr. Julian's motion subject to Mr. Shipley's amendment. Let's stick to that topic.
I will, Chair. I do want to say, with respect to you, it is not a personal grievance. It is a concern for the integrity of our processes that should rise above individuals' opinions of one another or the parties that they are a part of. Now, I do hope I will be able to say something regarding the presence of the witnesses here in due course, and the rules, of course, would allow me to do so under normal circumstances. The motion that Mr. Julian has brought before the committee identifies many individuals who should appear before the committee. It identifies the Minister of Public Safety, the Commissioner of Corrections Service Canada, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, the Correctional Investigator, the Federal Ombudsman for Victims of Crime, Tim Danson, representative or TIVs of the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers, and representative or representatives of the Union of Safety and Justice Employees. By my count, that is 8 individuals and or entities. In some cases, the entities will send multiple people to the same meeting, naturally, as happens. And the proposal is that all of those people would appear in one 3-hour meeting. I would submit to this committee that these are good names and organizations to hear from with respect to the matter of the transfer of Paul Bernardo for maximum to medium security prison. But I would respectfully suggest that hearing from all of those people in the course of one 3-hour meeting is fundamentally not an adequate way of dealing with the subject matter. It requires a number of things to be in place. For one, it requires all of these people to be available on the same day. So if we hear, for instance, that that the union is not available on a given day, but available on a different day, and that the minister is available on the day that the union is not available, but not available other days, then the committee will be in the position of needing to schedule that one meeting, and one meeting only, as authorized by this motion, at a time when either the minister or the union is not available. When it would obviously logically make much more sense to have those meetings take place on different days and to allow the committee to be more flexible in response to the availability of the various people that we would wish to hear from. Point of order. Yep.
Mr. Julian on a point of order.
Again, Mr. Chair, we have witnesses that have incredibly intense workplaces. They're doing so much for us on public safety. I would ask that we release them. I'm saddened by that because there's so many people, as Madame Michaud just said, in terms of the bill, how important it is to get the bill adopted. But I know that they all have work to do. And I think we're being disrespectful just having them listen to a Conservative filibuster rather than getting back to the work that they have to do on behalf of Canadians. So I'd ask that be released.
On the same point of order, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Biddle, go ahead.
I think I'm going to change my position from last time and agree with Mr. Julian. I don't think Mr. Shipley or the Conservatives are genuine in saving witness time, having all these witnesses before us, and we should let them go.
It's on the same point of order, Chair.
Mr. Dennis, on the same point of order.
Thank you, Chair. I would have had a better plan for saving the witness time, which would have been if the Chair considers the matter at hand to be this matter, then we should have scheduled the meeting on committee business or on this matter and not invited the witnesses. I would happily agree to dismiss the witnesses, and I would say going forward it would be wise for the Chair to respect witness time by not inviting witnesses who are going to appear on a different matter than the matter which is actually the matter at hand before the committee, in his view.
Mr. Dennis. So there having been substantial time passed since the last time we considered this question, is it the will of the committee to invite the witnesses to leave or to be released?
Yes.
I see unanimous consent.
With an apology, perhaps?
With an
Mr.
apology.
Chair?
I certainly apologize. I have to keep scheduling you because if you know what, keep your counsel to yourself.
Point of order, Chair.
I am speaking. I have the floor.
Sure.
So I'd like to apologize to you all for wasting your time yet again. It is a serious matter that we have before us to deal with Bill C-20. We are trying to get it done, and we're doing our best. The alternative is to capitulate to matters that are out of our control. So with apologies, I will continue to invite you and continue to schedule this matter. Hopefully we will get it done sooner than later. And I do heartily thank you for your time and for having to put up with committee in this way. So thank you all, and please feel free to depart if it's your wish, or if you want to stay for the show, you're welcome to do that as well.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Julian.
Could you commit to bringing cookies for the next meeting? If there's still a filibuster going on, at least they'll get something coming out of it.
The chair will consider that.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Just a point of order, Chair.
Ms. May has her hand up for quite some time. I just wanted to point that out.
Ms. May, I'm sorry I didn't notice you there. I apologize.
Chair, I have a point of order.
No need to apologize, Mr. Chair. Just as you know, and as the committee members will know, I have some amendments submitted at clause by clause. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd hate to not be here if we actually moved to clause by clause and I had a chance to speak to my amendments. I am assuming that I am also, like the witnesses, would not be fruitfully staying in the room in case you called on me. Is that a correct assumption? Because I don't want to miss the chance to present my amendments at clause by clause.
So, Ms. May, as I will personally commit that if we get to the point where we expect to have your amendments, I will inform you of my expectation. And as you may know, it's kind of not in our control.
I'm aware of the circumstances, and I extend love and sympathy to you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.
I had a point of order, Chair, as well.
Mr. Dennis, on point of order.
Chair, I hope this is helpful. You are not under any obligation to bring the witnesses back at subsequent meetings. You may schedule meetings at your discretion. I think many chairs under these circumstances would schedule a meeting of committee business. They might schedule a meeting of the subcommittee on agenda and procedure. You are not under any obligation to schedule clause by clause on C-20 and bring witnesses when you expect the discussion to be on another matter. I think out of respect for the witnesses, and it's also fully in keeping with the rules, and I don't need an answer now, but you can consult with the clerk. You would be fully within your rights as chair to schedule something else, to convene the subcommittee on agenda and procedure, to take other such matters that would potentially focus the discussion where it seems it's going to be anyways. So I just provide that as hopefully helpful advice, and hopefully it's received in the spirit of that. And I don't need a response now. You can certainly consult with the clerk, and
thank you for advice.
We'll see in the notice of the next meeting what you decide to do.
Thank you for your advice. And I will note that my expectation was informed by the notion that the motions that were before us were fully in keeping with what was being asked for. So I had every expectation that we could get through this quickly and get on to committee business or to C20. Mr. Julian, go ahead.
And you were absolutely right to do so, Mr. Chair. I wanted to compliment you because we do have from the House of Commons the obligation to do C20. So the fact that this filibuster has killed a month of committee work is not something that any committee chair should countenance. And I think your approach has been very effective. I just wish that the filibuster that has now lasted a month would end.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. So, Mr. Jennings, I'm not sure where we were with you. I think you were in the process of speaking.
Yes.
Okay, carry on.
Thank you, Chair. And look, for the benefit of Mr. Julian, who just raised a point of order, I think I will underline what our overall position is around this issue and this motion before I return to the sort of specific matter of that I was enumerating prior to his initial point of order. Our position is that it is critically important to get to the bottom of the fact that the government transferred this heinous rapist and killer from maximum security to medium security prison. This is a matter that we...
Yeah. I want to make sure that translation is working. Is it working for everybody?
I wasn't listening, sorry. I'm hearing English.
Je ne sais pas.
Madame de Bellefeuille, est-ce que la traduction fonctionne bien?
Je vous dirais que le député...
I would say that the MP is talking very quickly, so it's not so easy for the interpreter. Perhaps they could slow down, please.
Thank you, Messi. I hate to say this, but Mr. Jennings speaks more slowly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am happy to show deference in this matter, as well as all things, to our good translators, and in this matter, at least, to you. I thought some members might appreciate moving through the substance of my comments more quickly, but I appreciate the importance of les deux langues officielles, l'importance d'être.
I recognize the importance of the two official languages and to be comprehensible in both of these languages, so I will speak a bit more slowly. Thank you very much, Mr. Shifke, for that.
So our position overall in the Conservative Party is that we believe it is critically important for this committee to do the work of getting to the bottom of what happened in the context of the prison transfer of Mr. Bernardo. Not just because we need to find out what happened in this case, but also because we know there have been previous instances where people have transferred, families have not been properly informed, there's been significant public concern. I recall a number of debates associated with specific instances of this over years past, and the those debates were very fraught, I think, and understandably so. And Conservatives at the time took, I think, very principled positions on those issues. But they don't seem to have actually led to a change by the government. So every one of these cases, we get the government saying, "Whoa, what happened here? You know, someone should look into this." You know, from the people that are in charge of running our government. Or supposed to be, you know, so the importance of doing the work we need to do as this committee is to find out what happened in the case of the transfer of Mr. Bernardo. Yes, to get to the bottom of it, but also to make sure we don't find ourselves back here in another 12 months or 18 months dealing with another instance like this, where families were not properly informed, where a very dangerous, violent person was moved to medium security. Let's do the work now so we can actually solve the problem, and let's do it in a serious way. So there are some members who find this discussion uncomfortable, who find the discussion of the government's record on criminal justice to be embarrassing. But look, after 8 years, we need to get to the bottom of why this has repeatedly happened and how we can make sure it doesn't happen again. That is what is motivating us to push, to insist, and yes, to use the rules of this committee to insist on having this discussion in a proper way, to hear the people who need to be heard, and to get to the bottom of the matter that took place. It would be unfortunate if we were coming back again and again to this issue without having decisively dealt with it. It would be unfortunate from the perspective of the committee's agenda, but also from the perspective, much more importantly, from the perspective of the well-being of the public that are certainly following this issue with great concern. So this is what we are trying to do, to propel the committee towards doing this work that requires, in our view, 3 meetings to substantively get to the bottom of the matter at hand. And actually, Mr. Chair, I want to propose a sub-amendment in that context, because I think it would just further align the amendment with some of the language we had previously talked about. And the sub-amendment that I want to propose is to add the words "at least" in front of 3. So the revised would read that the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security hold at least 3 meetings, and then it continues as otherwise. I'm hopeful that 3 meetings would be enough. But for the reasons I was speaking to earlier, the fact that we can't always control people's schedules, and there are instances where maybe we schedule the 3 meetings, but there's one person that we need to hear from who's not available on any of those days. I think we do want to, out of great deference to our esteemed chair, provide the greatest possible flexibility around the scheduling of those meetings. So 3 requiring a minimum of 3 meetings ensures that the matter be treated with the seriousness that is required, and also really that we're able to have the flexibility around scheduling. Chair, why is it important to have at least 3 meetings? Looking at the text of the original motion from Mr. Julian, I counted 8 people or entities that he wants to hear from, and in our view, there's a need to hear from at least a 9th. Mr. Mendicino, and in previous versions we have also said there may be other witnesses in addition to the ones enumerated that parties or individuals on the committee want to put forward that can be considered as well. So, at a minimum, the 8 entities or individuals in Mr. Julian's original motion are the current Minister of Public Safety, the Commissioner of Correctional Services, the Deputy Minister for Public Safety, the Correctional Investigator, Federal Ombudsman for Victims of Crime, Tim Danson, representatives of the Union of Correctional Officers, and the representatives of the Union of Safety and Justice Employees. That does not include, by the way, the possibility that in the process of these discussions there might be other individuals, other victims that wish to come forward. And from what I understand, we're not currently aware of those other instances, but we should certainly countenance the possibility that there will be other people in the course of the discussion who want to come forward. So we're talking about a minimum of 8 individuals or entities. We're proposing a 9th. That is, it makes sense that the minister responsible for the decision, when the decision happened, be invited to appear. It's been noted previously, of course, that the committee can't compel people to appear. So in the worst case scenario, if the elected officials invited, Mr. Mendicino and the Minister of Public Safety chose not to appear, I would submit that would be unfortunate, but we would still have 7 individuals to schedule in one meeting. Mr. Julian's initial framing of the motion was to say, well, it kind of gets to 3 meetings because we're going to have 1 meeting where we're going to hear from all these witnesses and 1 meeting where we're going to hear from the public safety on ostensibly other matters, and one meeting that is an in-camera briefing on trauma-informed questioning of a committee. As my colleague Mr. Motz has said, we see value in the 1 hour briefing, but a private briefing intended to inform members of Parliament on these kinds of techniques is not the same as a public hearing. It shouldn't be seen as one of those hearings people are looking for to get to the bottom of the issue. And that briefing on trauma-informed questioning will naturally not be exclusive to preparing us for this discussion. It will be, I think, a broader tool for informing the committee of what's on the agenda, what's important to consider in these kinds of cases or situations. So I'm just trying to envision, in terms of the logic of his motion. Okay, yes, there's a desire to be able to question the Minister of Public Safety on the broad mandate of the minister, and there will be obviously there are so many issues related to public safety that are on the table for public discussion right now in this country. Everything from crime to foreign interference to many other issues. So that doesn't obviate the need to have the minister here to address this specific issue, and that is actually implied by Mr. Julian's original motion, because it does involve the committee inviting this particular group of people, which includes the minister, for the matter at hand, as well as then separately inviting the Minister of Public Safety on other matters. But our position is we need to have a serious look at the issue of the prison transfer, not to throw in other meetings as part of that calculation that are actually on other topics, but to actually have that minimum of 3 meetings that is actually looking at the issue on the table, the issue of the transfer of dangerous criminals to medium security prison, and the issue of how members of their families, representatives of their families, etc., are notified or included in the conversation. So our view, respectfully, is that the people that have sent us here would want us to get to the bottom of this issue that has been a reoccurring issue. If you look back at the debates that have happened in various cases, it has been a recurring issue. We want to make sure we get to the bottom of it. We do it in a serious way, and that requires us to have the number of meetings that are required. If you have one meeting where you have all of these individuals or groups, let's say 8 or 9 individuals or groups, I think first of all, you're going to have to get a 3-hour meeting, and these committee meetings are normally scheduled in 2-hour slots. So to say we're going to have one meeting that's going to be 3 hours, that requires that's not necessarily something that the committee can just say is going to happen. The committee may need to engage House of Commons and whips and others, and depending on other priorities of other committees, in order to get that happen. So it doesn't make sense to say necessarily that's just going to be an easy or an automatic thing. And certainly it constrains when when the meeting could occur. It means we wouldn't just meet in our regular time slot for the regular amount of time. So I think that's fairly obvious. So right away saying it's going to be one 3-hour meeting kind of bumps that back, and it puts at risk the idea that this is actually going to be something we can get done or get done in a reasonable amount of time. But then I also just try to envision kind of what that's going to look like in terms of the the potential combinations of witnesses. So one way to do a 3-hour meeting is that you would divide it up into 3 1-hour segments. So you have one group of witnesses in the first hour, one in the second hour, one in the third hour. And then so you have 9 witness groupings. So ostensibly you could say, okay, well we're going to have one witness grouping for each of the 3 hours, and probably we're going to have about an average of 3 of the witness groupings for each hour, and we're going to proceed through
Point of order, Mr.
in
Chair.
that fashion.
I just wanted to make sure that before we continue that we have quorum. Do we have quorum, Mr. Chair?
I believe we do. We just need to have half of us in the room, and we have.
No.
So let's just make sure we had quorum. No.
Thank you for your observation.
I just wanted to make sure that we're following all the rules, Mr. Chair, as always.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'd be open to suspending if people want to talk, but I'm happy to keep. I mean, either way. Do you guys, no? Okay. All right, Chair. I admire Mr. Schiffke's concern for the rules of quorum being enforced. I think sometimes that's been interpreted as being at the table or in the room. So I don't know how that's interpreted by the chair here, because I think we have some folks that are in the room
Mr.
but not
Dennis,
at the table.
The chair has already observed that, given his feedback. You don't need to second guess the chair all the time.
Thank you, Chair. There may be some value in second guessing the chair under the circumstances, but I gather that second guessing the chair isn't encouraged by the chair, which is understandable on a psychological level, if not on a substantive level.
Mr. Dennis, if you wish to differ with the chair's decisions, you're free to challenge them. But otherwise, let's just move on with our business at hand.
Chair, I don't think the chair had made a decision, nor had I challenged it. I was simply pointing out some matters of context. But I'll return to the previous matter that I was discussing, which was the way in which Mr. Julian's motion, as originally written, could notionally be operationalized, and the motion, as it's written, involves 8, potential addition of 9, considering the possibility that the minister might not show up. We're looking at between, say, 8 or 9 people or groups that would need to come. So I was saying that one way of operationalizing the desire to have 9 different people or groups at the same 3-hour committee meeting is to have 3 stakeholders appear in each hour. What that looks like is you would have, say, the minister with the deputy minister and the commissioner of correction services, and then you would have the correctional investigator, the federal ombudsman for victims of crime, and Tim Danson all appearing together, and then you would have to have the union of Canadian correctional officers and the Union of Safety and Justice Employees and former Minister Mendicino sitting at the same time. So either way you end up with some awkward combinations. And my colleague is just pointing out that, of course, we would need to have. It's of course normal and expected that you would have the minister appear on their own, and I agree. I think it would also make sense to have Mr. Danson appear alone and be able to have the time that's required to present and answer questions. What I'm pointing out is simply that the framework we've been given in terms of the motion from Mr. Julian requires us to create these kind of awkward witness combinations where people with very different experience perspectives on the same topic are therefore required to sit at the table together and potentially debate with each other or focus on very different aspects of the topic. And in committees that I've been a part of in the past, our general practice has been to not do that. The practice has been to say, first of all, are there witnesses that, given the nature of their experience or their position, it makes sense for them to appear alone? And generally, with the case of the minister, the former minister, Mr. Danson, I think the nature of their experience, what they bring to the topic, it makes sense for them to appear alone and or with in the case of ministers, with the officials he would want to bring with him to play a supporting role. It doesn't seem to me to be a serious approach to the committee managing its agenda to try to say, like, these are the kinds of combinations that would be required. So I'm obviously kind of naturally suspicious of kind of what's going on here. Why would we say we have to pack all of these individuals and groups into one 3-hour session? So another possible, but the other thing about having the meeting set up as 3 consecutive 1-hour meetings is that actually once you've heard from the witnesses, you have very limited time for questions. So if you have a 1-hour session and you've got 3 witnesses, you allow conservatively 5 minutes for each opening statement. Again, given the sensitivities of the matter, given the issues we're dealing with, we may want to give more time. And in fact, I think a trauma-informed approach might lend itself in this kind of a situation, especially with either victims or representatives, to not being as rigorous in terms of time. If somebody is in the midst of sharing very personal reflections about how certain events impacted them, it would potentially be a judgment call of the committee and or the chair to say we want to let that person finish what they're saying. So if you allow, I mean, theoretically at a minimum of 15 minutes for 3 witnesses or witness groups to present, but more likely because of people going slightly over time, because of other aspects of context, you're gonna get that out to at least 20 minutes, right? And then you're going to have to allow probably 5 to 10 minutes in between each witness group for turnover.
Mr. Julian, on a point of order.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Janis talked earlier about the minutes. So just to clarify for the minutes, I wanted to say that a fresh the fresh copy of the motion that we're debating has been sent to the clerk, including the name of the federal ombudsman for victims of crime, Benjamin Roebuck, and clarifying Tim Danson, lawyer for the victims, to appear, so that we make sure the minutes reflect what was said at the mic. Thank you.
So this is basically just to update us as to what you said when you initially. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry. I just on that point of order because I am confused.
Mr. Janis, on a point of order.
Yeah, Mr. Julian, are you saying that the form of the motion that you moved is the same as the form that you put on notice verbally on Monday? Because it seems like it's different from the written version that was distributed.
Mr. Janis, Mr. Julian just said that when he moved the motion, he said somewhat different than what is actually in the written motion, and he's just clarifying that he sent an updated copy, hard copy, to everybody so that they're on the same page. Mr. Julian, did you want to respond as well?
It's as Mr. Janis knows, we talked about the federal ombudsman for victims of crime. I just included his name in the updated motion sent to the clerk, and Tim Danson was listed in the original motion, but not with his title, which is lawyer for the victims. So for the purposes of the minutes, I wanted to ensure that both the name and the title of those 2 individuals was in the motion that we are considering.
Thank you for your clarification. It is, of course, important that the minutes are accurate.
Sorry, just on the same point of order, it wasn't clear to me. I'm sorry, Mr. Julian, but my question was: is the text of which you moved the same as the text of what was read on Monday? And you're nodding it is. So fair enough.
Believe not. The text of what you moved is what you've just sent out to us, correct?
But it's the same as what you read out on Monday that I understand you believe should have been in the minutes, but wasn't.
The name and title are the same as what I read on Monday, but for further clarification, it includes the name of the federal ombudsman and the title for Tim Danson.
Thank you for the clarification. Did you wish to carry on the point of order, or carry on with your?
No, Chair. I'll return to my my remarks, but I'll just say that it would be helpful if the clerk can distribute the text of what was read to the members, given that it was not in Monday's.
I believe
minutes.
that is already done.
I have been refreshing my email and I have not received it yet. So
it's underway. So
it's it's going to be sent imminently. Is that what you're saying, Chair? Okay.
Yes.
Because I think it is important for the committee to know precisely what it is debating and to have the text of what it is debating in front of it. Although I don't get the impression that the clarifications substantively change the direction. They just provide clarification about names and titles. So, what I was just before Mr. Julian's intervention, I was just kind of walking through why I think the changes that we're proposing are necessary logistically, given just the sort of the inevitable practical problems that arise from the framework for studying this issue that was presented by Mr. Julian. So we have we have nine entities that could be or are likely to appear. We have, though not directly stated, I hope implied the possibility that committee members might be able to suggest additional witnesses or members of the public who have some perspective to offer might wish to come forward on this issue. But at a minimum, we're talking about 9. Okay, if our amendment doesn't pass on Mr. Mendocino, we're talking a minimum of 8, right? So that would be if it's 8, we've got 3,
Point of order, Mr.
3,
Chair.
and 2. So
Ms. O'Connell on a point of order.
Just going.
Even though, thank you, Mr. Chair. Even though in the rules, it's clear it's a filibuster, but within the rules, there still cannot be repetitiveness. And we've actually already heard, I believe, 3 times, but at least once before, Mr. Jennis describing the difference between 9 witnesses and 8 witnesses. And it would be important that if he's going to filibuster, that at least he provides new content.
Just comment on the point of order, Chair.
Jennis on a point of order.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do accept that I said the number. I was just correcting myself because I had said 9 and then I wanted to be accurate. So I think that was a relatively perfunctory and brief comment, but I did just want to provide that clarification. But it's a small point. I mean, I'll go back to the point I was just making, Chair. Is that okay? You're trying to slot that into. If one way of doing this is you have 3 consecutive 1-hour blocks, inevitably there's going to be 5 to 10 minutes of turnover in between, where witnesses come and go and hands are shaken and so forth. And then, so you're talking in practice about 55 minutes per witness group. And then you're talking almost certainly about 20 minutes of testimony. Right, so that leaves 35 minutes for questioning rounds. So likely that means 1 round of questioning with 2 to 3 minutes extra for each party at the end, which means that we're supposed to be studying the issue in a serious way, and committee members will be faced with a situation where you have likely 3 in most cases. Witnesses or witness groups with substantive and different things to say, and each party is then expected to kind of cram all the things they might wish to say or questions they might wish to ask in 1 round of questioning with a bit of change at the end, right? A bit of extra, and that seems to me to just be fundamentally and obviously unserious. And I don't mean unserious to be pejorative or insulting. It may be that the motion was brought with the best of intentions. But if you really break down and say, how much time are we going to have to be able to ask the questions and get the answers, and to say, well, how much time are we going to have? We're going to have 1 slot with 2 minutes extra at best to try to go through 3 very distinct witness groups. And then we're going to try to have a fast turnover and then do it all again in the same crammed bit of time, have that fast turnover, do it all again in a crammed space of time, and then that'll be done, right? Like this obviously doesn't make sense from a theoretically, there's innumerable alternatives. I guess you could have all 9 groups sit there for 3 hours, but I suspect that wouldn't happen. Another way that, and I've been on committees that I was previously the vice chair of the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations that regularly met for 3 hours, so had to consider these questions of how to structure its time in the context of a 3-hour meeting, and it would do it in typically one of 2 ways. It would be the 3 consecutive 1-hour blocks, which was required very fast turnover and had limited amount of questioning opportunities, as I've illustrated. But the other way is to do kind of 2 groupings for an hour and a half each. So you have an hour and a half, potentially more witnesses. So if we were to do it that way, then we would have to, say, have 4 or 5 witness groups for an hour and a half each. And again, just having 4 or 5 witness groups at the same time, it would mean you'd have more rounds of questioning in each case, though I think not much more. In that case, you'd likely have all of the witness testimony, and then you would have perhaps an hour of questions, which would be substantively 2 rounds. But still, if you want to focus each round of questioning on one witness group, as is often done, then you can only ask questions to 2 out of the 4 or 5 witness groups. I don't think that makes sense. I mean, I think a good rule of thumb for committees managing their time vis-a-vis witnesses is that each party would have roughly 1 round per witness group, so that if you wanted to spend a round questioning a witness, that you would have enough rounds to be able to make sure that you might not want to do it that way. Of course, you might want to use multiple rounds on the same witness, or jump between witnesses in the same round. But I think that is a good rule of thumb for a committee that is serious about getting to the bottom of the issue. And there'd be other more sort of ad hoc ways of doing it. You could have one witness appear for just half an hour, and then you could have other witnesses appear for an hour and a half or so. But either way, we're talking about really cramming people together, and almost certainly not giving the kind of solo opportunity to be heard that some of these people really deserve to have. I think if we do have the courtesy of having the former Minister of Public Safety come before the committee, I hope he would agree. If he does agree to come, and then we say, okay, we want you to sit for an hour and a half while we also question a whole bunch of other people who have important things to say on the subject. I don't think that would make sense in terms of respect for his time or the choice he's made to appear before the committee. I think that's fairly obvious. So. Chair, sort of behind this then, like having deconstructed the inevitable challenges associated with hearing from each of the witnesses in the sequence described, I'm sort of left with the question of why. Like, why was the motion proposed with a structure that is obviously not workable? Maybe Mr. Julian or in concert with those he was kind of negotiating with around this, maybe he was working quickly and didn't kind of do that kind of structured analysis of how each of the hearings would occur, or maybe somebody did. Maybe somebody on the government side looked at this and they said, well, this is an embarrassing issue for us. Conservatives are insisting that it be talked about. So we want to do issues management, if you like, and talk about it as little as possible.
Mr. Schiffke, on the point
apologies
of order.
to Mr. Jennis, who's doing a fantastic job. I actually find it invigorating. I was just wondering, this room is booked for another committee meeting at 7:30. And I was wondering through you, Mr. Chair, if we could ask the clerk to officially look into what the transfer time would be and whether or not there's a specific time we would need to adjourn to ensure that meeting was able to start on time, because we do have witnesses booked for that meeting as well.
Looks like the other committee is in the other room, so it's not going to be a problem.
Fantastic. I'm sure that Dr. Lewis is very pleased as well, as we will be sitting on that committee together, and I look forward to that. You got subbed out. Now I'm very sad. I want that on record, Mr. Chair, but I'll turn the floor back over to Mr. Jennis.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Mr. Schiffke. That's an important clarification. I don't know exactly what the plan is on the other side around time, so I do want to make sure before I continue with my remarks, I did have a number of verbal notices of motion I wanted to provide on other matters, so I will just read those verbal notices of motion now, and then I'll proceed with my remarks. The verbal notices of motion on the other matters.
I would encourage you to file those. We are debating the motion before us, the sub-amendment, or the amendment and the sub-amendment. It would be better if we could stick to that.
Chair, I'll be brief, but it is a long-standing convention that members can provide verbal notices of motion. So I hope you'll indulge me to do that just briefly. So the first of those motions, and maybe some information can be provided in writing, but the first of those motions is that, in the opinion of the committee, the government should immediately list the IRGC as a terrorist entity under the Criminal Code, and this be reported to the House. That's the first notice of motion. The second is that the committee report to the House that it should give second reading to Bill C-350, the Combating Torture and Terrorism Act, and that it be referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. The third notice of motion is that the committee recognize the rise in hateful attacks against people of faith and the places where they worship in Canada, affirm the constitutionally protected right to freedom of religion,
Mr. Chair,
and call upon the government to immediately increase protection for synagogues.
Thank you. Can I get clarification? Can a non-committee member provide a notice of motion for a topic that is not actually being debated at the time?
Well, strictly speaking, the matter, these notices of motion are not part of the debate we're undertaking. They're not on the issue. Mr. Jennis is, however, properly subbed into this meeting, and so, in my opinion, he's free to make those notices of motion. It's really an inappropriate time to do so, but I'm becoming brain weary and half dead, so I'm going to let it go.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So on that, any member at any time can provide a notice of motion, even for a committee that they do not sit on.
When they're properly subbed into that committee, I believe it is true.
Can we get clarification?
I'll ask the clerk and I'll get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for your wise ruling that does certainly accord
Sorry,
with my
point of order,
understanding of the
Chair.
rules.
You didn't give the floor back, and I'd like to hear the ruling before someone just moves on.
He certainly didn't give it to you, Ms. O'Connell.
Mr. Jennis, I'm sorry for interrupting. Yes, so Mr. Jennis is properly subbed in for Mr. Lloyd, and therefore he has the same powers that Mr. Lloyd would have in this particular committee at this time.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. O'Connell, for assisting the committee with that clarification of the rules. I will just start the notice of motion I was reading from the beginning, so that there's clarity about what it says. That the committee recognize the rise in hateful attacks against people of faith and the places where they worship in Canada, affirm the constitutionally protected right to freedom of religion, and call upon the government to immediately increase protection for synagogues, mosques, and churches in Canada, and that this be reported to
Monsieur le Président, point d'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Point of order, please. Chair? Yes, Melfi, please go ahead. Well, I've been here for the last 45 minutes or so, and I'm a bit lost. Could you please guide me? Because I thought we were talking about an amendment to a motion, various amendments. I'd understood that. Mr. Jennis is excellent in terms of communicating what he wants to get across and what he's proposing in terms of sub-amendments to Mr. Julian's motion. But now I don't really understand why suddenly we're talking about notions of motion. Can you please instruct me in this? Because very sincerely, I'm whip my party and I'm replacing a member. But I feel like I'm wasting my time, but perhaps I'm mistaken because I don't know exactly what's happening now in terms of procedures. It seems that we're talking about a debate or proposals for sub-amendments to motion, and then now we're reading notices of motion. So can you please tell me what's happening exactly at the moment?
Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you on this, and certainly welcome to the committee, and thank you for sitting here for these 45 minutes. Yes, we are engaged in a motion that Mr. Shipley has amended, or has offered an amendment, and Mr. Jennis has offered a sub-amendment. Strictly speaking, that's what we should be talking about. Speaking of notices of motion on various other matters is, strictly speaking, not in order, and I have advised Mr. Jennis of this. But hopefully he's done at this point with those notices of motion, and we can be carrying on with the substantive matters of the sub-amendment that he has moved.
Sorry, Chair, I am almost done on that. I do just want to clarify, though, because you did say I could provide them, and they were provided. So I want to clarify that those do count as having been provided as notices of motion.
I don't think I said you could provide them. I said that it was not really in order to do it at this time, but that I was kind of worn down and probably let it go, right? So are you letting it go, or are you not letting it go? I mean, I don't agree with your interpretation of them not being in order, but you have
I have read them.
You have given the committee notice of motion.
Thank you. Okay, and so they will be in the minutes for the meeting.
Everything you've said, as far as I know, is going to be in the minutes.
Well, everything I say goes in the evidence, but the minutes are the decisions or the notices, etc. So, provided that, can I get maybe a nod from the clerk if there's an understanding based on the chair that those will be in the minutes? Okay.
The clerk has so nodded.
Okay. So, and duly nodded. And I'll just provide one more notice of motion that is related to the matter at hand. The notice of motion is that, in the opinion of the committee, the family of Paul Bernardo's victims should have been meaningfully consulted on his transfer to medium security, and that this be reported to the House. Having provided those four notices of motion.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order. Sorry for interrupting Mr. Jennis. It's very interesting what he's talking about, but I really want to understand. Is he challenging your authority by continuing, by reading these notices of motion? Am I getting the right drift here? Is he actually challenging you when you said it was inappropriate and that it was inadmissible? So is he challenging your authority? Have I understood that, or am I totally out in left field?
I certainly would interpret it in this way. But as I said, it's 10 after 7 and late at night. We've been here all day, and I'm a little bit worn down. So I really would hope that Mr. Jennis would get back to the matter at hand and let us get done so that we can actually vote on this motion or this sub-amendment and whatnot, and actually get to the point where we can do the study. And anyway, Mr. Jennis, I believe you still have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I do have more to say on the substantive topic, but I have received a note that there have been informal discussions among the parties, and there is a universal will to adjourn the meeting. So I don't know if I'm correct in that, but I will move the adjournment of the meeting on the basis of, I think, discussions that have happened. So I'll move that, and we'll see if my understanding of that was correct or not.
Move the motion to adjourn on the basis of whatever that makes it debatable. Why don't you?
No. I am providing rationale as to what I think has happened. I am moving the dilatory motion, which is I move to adjourn.
Thank you. So the motion on the floor is to adjourn. Are we all in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Ring it